Okay, questions?
So when do we gonna have some better butts in score?
You didn't raise your hand.
But it was a follow-up question.
You still didn't raise your hand.
Are you going to make some dwarfs?
Dwarves?
Yeah.
They're not a real faction. I'm gonna get booed off the stage right away. You know what? I did see some new dwarf stuff this week, or last week before I left, that I think we know it's coming. Is there something coming for dwarves that we haven't seen? Was like yes. We've announced that, right? Was it in a book?
It was in a book some time ago.
Okay. Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes, well, sometimes you'll see something pop up on our website, and we're like, when did we do that? Or other times, you know something's coming out, or you'll start talking about it, and people are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, nothing. So you just don't know, because we'll finish something. I have probably 12 models that nobody's seen, because I started working on the new edition models last year. The casters were done by the end of summer. We had to have them finished in time for production. So there's models that I have that I've been doing for the last year that nobody's seen, that I've been dying to show. Well, I showed a couple of them today, and then finally we have some of the new casters that I've worked on coming out. So there's been a lot of things that I've been dying to share with people, like the character Warpwolf that I showed earlier, that I just haven't been able to show anybody. And so finally, I'm like, finally you can see the new stuff. Another question. Over here. Not a chance.
I would like to show some stuff from the new faction.
What new faction? I have not fallen for that, but you know what? I'm working on stuff for the new faction. There's a no. You know what? You know what's on this? This is my kid's computer. There are 4 models on it, and I did that on purpose to make sure that I didn't show anything that I wasn't supposed to. So literally the 4 models that I brought that nobody's ever seen is all that's on here. In fact, my kid wouldn't even give me her password to get into the computer. She made a new user for me so I wouldn't see any of her texts or anything else that's going on. So 17-year-olds. So another question besides you.
All right, we've seen one new model today. What's the other one?
Well, you have to save the best for last, right? So tomorrow I'm going to show 2 Legion models. I'm going to show a Legion Solo from Primal, and I'm going to show the coolest Legion character, Warbeast, ever. Well, that's personal opinion. He's super cool, though. I'll be anxious to see what people say. I know the Legion community is going to be like, oh, it's great, but I'm curious what other people are going to say. I'd like to hear some of the other faction communities complain that it's not fair that Legion gets something that cool. Don't worry, I have other stuff coming. I'm working on Protectorate. I'm working on, like I said, the new faction. I have more Crix coming. I have more Legion coming. I have more Retribution coming. So I'm starting to bounce around a little bit more now that I've got a little bit faster at sculpting. So hopefully I can get models to most of the factions, and everybody that plays those factions ideally will like them. But tomorrow, Legion. Yeah, saving the best.
So you said you're getting faster. How long does it take on average to make like human size?
It depends on how much I mess it up. I've gotten a lot better at that. There were times, like one of the first models that I did at Privateer was the Earthbreaker, and I think I made about 150 changes on it. Part of that was my fault. Part of it was just people were looking at it and seeing different things, but I just wasn't very good yet. And it took a long time, and then a lot of beat downs from my bosses to get me to a point where I stopped making so many mistakes. And even though you're aware of how things should be, sometimes you just have to keep doing it and keep getting scolded for it until you finally figure out what's right. So the answer to that question can vary. It just depends on how complex the model is. There are times, I was working on a model over Christmas this year, a Crix caster in fact, your next caster, that I didn't really want to work on because I didn't think it was going to be cool. It turned out really cool. But I was trying to find something to do that would keep me from working on that caster. And so in that time, I think I did 3 different models over about a 3-week period. One was Hellmouth, which if you haven't seen Hellmouth that we just solicited, I actually have my version of it on my table here. The other was the Retribution Solo that I showed earlier. And I think there was one other model in there that I finished. It may have been that Warp Wolf. But I did like 3 models in the time just to not work on the Crix model. And the Crix model came in and everybody's like, wow, that's a great Crix model. I'm like, God, no. So the theory is that they're going to give me models that I don't want to work on, so I'll get like 3 or 4 other models finished faster. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, no.
It's like, well, you don't
He's finished.
work on a specific model, but what are your favorite things to work on? Because we all like some stuff more than others.
Naked butts, obviously.
Naked butts, yes. Anytime one of my female sculpts come out, there's usually a 7 or 8 page thread on the forums about bad butts for the game. But they're armored, so it's okay. My favorite is usually organics. If I had my choice, I'd just work on Hordes models, just because it's easier for me to work on organics. Armor is a slow process because it's very precise and it's crisp. And organics, I can, especially for, say, Nephilim, there was someone that said, well, the Nephilim anatomy is wrong. No, it's not, because I'm designing the Nephilim anatomy. It's whatever I make it to be. So I can get away with a lot more mistakes or unrealistic anatomy doing beasts. Whereas if I'm doing a human face, for example, everybody that's here, if you look at a sculpt of a human face that doesn't look right, everybody knows that there's a problem with it. You may not know what the problem is, but you can look at it and say, gosh, there's something wrong with that face. Whereas with the beast, you're like, oh, he looks like he's going to kill something. That's cool. As far as armor goes, I like to work like on Retribution armor because their armor is very round and organic. So like the Protectorate model that I'm working on right now is a little bit more of a challenge just because there's layers of armor and it's just challenging. So and it's something new because I've never worked on that style of armor before. Yes, good?
Yeah.
All right.
Does the new Hordes faction have a lot of armor?
What new Hordes faction? I really hope that we announce what the Hordes faction is going to be at Lock and Load, because I am tired of keeping secrets. To keep the secret for the new edition under locks for the last couple of years, especially as much as I get out to game stores and try to get to events, it's painful because I have people come up and try to trick, like, hey, what are you working on? Where you're in the middle of a game, or they're like, here's some food, what are you working on? I'm like, well, so it's tough because people want to know. So I'm hoping we don't have to keep this secret for another year. I did get to see a clip of the promotional video for the new faction.
What new faction?
It is going to be very cool. I'm very excited about the new faction. So I mean, outside of that, I can't say a whole lot, but it's coming and it's going to be definitely special.
When you make your new models, do your bosses basically tell you, okay, we need this many light jacks, and they already know the rules and say one needs a rocket launcher, one needs a sword, or do you just make a model and then people find rules for, oh, this looks like it should have?
Well, what usually happens is we get a brief. Maybe it's from the designers that says what that model looks like, or the inspiration behind that model. A lot of times we'll know what the weapons are going to be, like you said, a rocket launcher or a sword. So then it'll go to the art director, and he'll assign that model to be concepted, and that'll go through a process, a review process. So an artist may do 10 versions of that model until they finally say, oh, that looks good, that's what we're looking for. And then once that's approved, then it comes down to the sculptors. And then we'll look at it and we'll start sculpting it. So by the time it gets to us, it's designed. It already has the sword, or it already has that rocket launcher. So we're, on the sculpting side of it, we're not really making up a whole lot. Now there are times where we'll look at something and say, that's not gonna work as a sculpt, or it doesn't look right. One of the models I'm working on now, we changed the way some parts work, just because it just wouldn't look right as a miniature. It looks cool as a drawing. But sometimes concept artists will be like, there's a lot of open space here, squiggly lines, okay, that's cool. And as a 2D piece of art, it doesn't look bad, but trying to sculpt squiggly lines does not look good on the miniature. So we have to, as sculptors, we have to tweak it a little bit. The good thing is, at Privateer, everybody's gotten so comfortable with each other that there's a lot of trust there, where if we come to the to the art director and say, look, this would look cool if we did this, they're willing to discuss it. And a lot of times with the sculptors, they're like, okay, try it. Or if the pose looks weird, we might say, let's try this different pose. And all of a sudden that pose does look cool, and they're like, go with it. So we can talk through if there's something that's not going to work. There's times where a model may come in for the faction that I play, and I don't like it because I know I'm going to play that model in a year, and sometimes I'll complain about it. Sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. Sometimes like the Blightbringer. When the concept came out, I was like, shouldn't we make another dragon? And Ed Burrell told me it was probably something like, shut up and make what the concept art is, because that's Ed telling me what to do. But he's like, no, we want to do something different. Let's make something different. Let's not make another dragon. We did that one time already. Let's make the Blightbringer. And so that was a case of a battle that I lost. But there's been other cases where I come in and I'm like, well, we don't like this, let's change that. Or the Denegra 2 pose was totally changed. The concept that I had, I was like, oh, can I change it? They're like, you know what, you can do whatever you want, just make it cool. I'm like, okay. And the Denegra, I'm going to share a quick story too. Denegra 2 is kind of a cool story because when I was in college for 3D in about 2008, one of our players in my local community was like, you should do a resculpt of Denegra 2, because it was bad, because it needed it. And so I started it when I was in college, and it looked not very good. I started it, and then when I started at Privateer, that first year, they were like, I saw the concept, I was like, oh, a resculpt, I'd like to actually do the resculpt. No, you're not really ready for that. Then the next summer, they're like, what do you think about doing the resculpt? I'm like, okay. Well, then it got pushed off until last summer. And last summer, when my supervisor, Ron Cruzy, came to me, he was like, are you ready to do the Denegra 2 resculpt? Like, well, are you sure you want me to do it this year? And he's like, everybody in the world wants you to do the Denegra 2 resculpt. I'm like, you know what, now I'm ready to do that sculpt. Had I done it the first year or the second year with Privateer, it wouldn't have been what it needed to be. So I feel like by doing it last summer, I had finally gotten to the point where I could do that model justice. So it was kind of full circle. I had started something in college as a fan project, and then I actually got to redo the entire model working for the studio. Just a fun story. All right, I'm sorry. Any more questions? Another question.
There's still some manual sculpting being done?
A little bit, yes. There was a stretch where we were 100% digital, but now there's been a few projects that just were better suited for the traditional style of sculpting. And they're still like Brian Dugas, who, Brian's been digital now for I think 2 years, but traditionally he was one of the best sculptors in the world, in my opinion. Digitally, he's right there where he was, but he, when his rapid prototypes come in, he'll actually physically sculpt stuff on there if they needed to be repaired, if something didn't quite look right, or there's some edging that needed to be thickened up, or some trim work, or he'll actually go in traditionally and fix that. Whereas for me, having never sculpted traditionally, if it comes in messed up, someone else has to do it because I have no skill at that. Other questions?
Yeah, when you sculpted the model, do you have any input into how the guy cuts it up? So it come in separate pieces, and can you tell him not to have the pieces so small and make them fiddly to glue together?
In an ideal world, that would work out just fine. But if we oversimplify it, then you have a single piece model, and your pose is boring. So sometimes, one of the examples that I like to use on Apollonia 2, she has a claw that's out like this. Setting the mic down. She has spikes coming out here, going the opposite direction. So she's like this, the spikes are out like this. If you lay that in a mold, it doesn't work. So we had to cut the hand off. So people are like, well, why'd you have to cut the hand off? Because it doesn't lay up in a mold that way. And even though that's a fiddly bit, it makes the pose cooler. She's like this, it looks more epic than if it's more boring like that. So sometimes we have to make decisions like that. It's not designed to irritate the players or make it more difficult for you guys to assemble. Seriously, because as a player, like when I open something like Mechanic Thralls and it's one piece, I celebrate because I'm like, yes, this is going to be an easy one to assemble. But after you assemble a model that's 5 or 6 pieces and it's a really cool pose and it looks good on the table, There's something a little more satisfying about that too. So as far as going deeper into that question, we work with the production department, the sculptors do. The production will come to us and point out where things should be cut. We have a couple of guys that at this point, that's all they do is break down the models, and they cut up the models and they fix things, because it might be as simple as, well, we don't like how that hand is, just turn it a little bit for us. And it's a pretty easy process digitally. And if it makes it easier for production to make that model, then that's what we'll do. So I have some notes from production. I'm not going to show you because it has the new Legion beast on it, but I'll show it tomorrow. It's kind of like a homework assignment where you can see where they want some cuts made. They want a weapon thickened up just to make it better for production. So you put that weapon on there and it doesn't snap right off, kind of thing. And earlier I used an example. I had Zuriel sitting here. His swords are too thick in my opinion. I made them that way. It's my fault, but it's because the swords have to be thick anyway to cast. Well, as I was thinking about that, in my mind, I was probably thinking of him being 35, 40 millimeters like a normal human, so I made the weapons as thick as the weapon on a 35 or 40 millimeter human might be. Well, scaled up to whatever he is, 60 millimeters, at that point, they just got a little too thick, and they don't look bad, and we all know that in the new edition, he has a 2-inch melee range now, so it's every Legion player is fine with the thickness of those weapons, but it's just something you learn as you go, and I could have gotten away with making them a lot thinner. More questions? Anybody? Everybody's ready for like the next round. Oh no.
Really? Place your wife too?
I'm sorry.
Place your wife too?
Does your wife play?
Oh no.
No?
No.
Why? She doesn't like your models.
It's possible.
Why?
I may not sculpt for the factions that they like, so
And your children?
my daughter is at home right now by herself, so I'm hoping I have a home to go back to next week. As a 17-year-old teenager, there's always the chance that there's nothing left when I get back. And the saddest part about that is my dog is back with her. As long as my dog's okay, I'll be okay.
So I have a question. Do you have like an interesting story that you made a mistake in sculpting and you went almost all the way to the production?
I can be.
That's like some models you put for each and you make like a really small sword for it.
Well, sometimes we don't necessarily know the rules. I like to know the rules for the models that I work on, because if the rules are really good for the model, it doesn't really matter how the sculpt turns out. Everybody's going to love it. The Earthbreaker is not one of my favorite sculpts that I've done, but the rules are really good, so everybody loves it, right? See? I could do a really cool sculpt, and if the rules are bad, the model's not as popular. As far as mistakes, there are times that, this is going to be shocking to you, there are times that we goof around in the studio and do immature, stupid things to models. And the models can be on layers, and you can make those layers disappear. So you put something stupid on a model that should never be there, and then you turn the layer invisible and you forget about it. So far, those layers have all been caught before they're passed over to an engineer. Or I had an engineer, Nathan, one of our engineers, who's a fantastic sculptor. He came to me the other day, he's like, is that supposed to be on there? No. He's like, I didn't think so. And it was one of those things that my boss is like, you know what you should put on there? So me being a wise guy, I did. And you can imagine what it is, and you're probably all right. Anyway, those have not made it into production on accident, but there are definitely little things that are put on there that we're goofing around on. Occasionally, I'll try to sneak an Easter egg in on some of my sculpts. If you look at Denegra 3, on her base, on the front of her base, she has an arch, and the city I'm from actually has a giant arch. It's a monument, a landmark. So, in St. Louis, yeah, exactly. So on the base of Denager 3, I have the St. Louis Arch that I've snuck in. So every once in a while I'll sneak something in, and I tried to do a skyline on a drudge, and it got caught, so I had to get rid of it. But it's almost like a personal challenge for me to try to sneak something by, by the guys that are like, what is that? I'm like, I'll redo it. So, but I got away with the Arch, so I'm proud of that one.
Do you have a signature? Like for instance, like with sculpting model, you put something for sale. Not just like this big Easter egg where someone like mark.
I mean, sometimes I'll put my initials on a model. I think the Blightbringer had my initials on it, and I picked that up from Brian, one of our other sculptors. I picked that up because he initials some of his stuff. I was like, that's kind of cool. I should do that. The cup underneath the Blighted Bather, I actually have my initials underneath that cup. So every once in a while, I'll sneak something like that on there, but not too often on that. I want to try to do something a little sneakier. Yeah, someday, one of these evenings or something, you can catch me and I'll off air and tell you stories that I can't do it now because someone might see this and I'll get in trouble because they know it was their idea.
So what about dragons in Legion? No?
Dragons in Legion, I have done, let's see, I've done every Legion model except one for the next 2 books. And I've already let everyone know that the one that I haven't done yet, I will be doing. So I think in the new edition, I feel like Legion leans very, very dragon-like. I like that they have a lot of fire come in, and hopefully we'll see more dragon-like models. So if it's Legion you want to see, tomorrow you can let me know what you think of the new Beast. I'll say, have you guys heard of Lord of the Rings, right? I mean, you guys are gamers, Lord of the Rings. So there was a beast in Lord of the Rings, the Balrog, that kind of inspired this new Legion heavy character beast. So when they were like, it's going to look, because it was Legion, I was already going to do it. But when they said it was Balrog-like, I was like, I'm definitely doing that one. So when you see it tomorrow, if you think it looks Balrog-like, you can let me know. But I'm anxious. If I could only show one model and I had to pick from everything that I've done, that would be the model I would have brought with me. Fortunately, they let me show a few other things, and I'm just trying to save the best for last for tomorrow. But yes, in my opinion, Legion has some very cool dragon-like models coming. So yes. And I'm working on a few little things for Legion that I'm kind of doing it on the side. So I'm hoping to use it as some inspiration and. Just because Legion needs more stuff.
It's a regular question.
Sure it is.
No, really.
It's a regular
Not
question.
about sport.
Wait, what?
It's not about sport.
Okay, it's not about sport.
I don't know if I'm correct, but I heard that it was the Gobber Tinker who got just designed as a side project, and then later on he was given the rules because everybody found the model to be really awesome. Is that true? And is there a chance of something like this happening? Do you have maybe a model that you hope to get for someday?
There are times that things like that can happen. Where, like last year at Gen Con, Michael Jenkins was working on one of the, I think it's the Bog Trog Trawler or one of the Bog Trogs, and he was just taking player input over the weekend about what he should do to it, and turned out really cool. And so at Privateer we were like, we should make a model out of that because it looks great. So yes, that does happen. Not a lot. I know for me, there's a couple of things that I'd like to see. Shepherds are FA3 in the new edition. Well, I don't want 3 of the same Shepherd running around, so I want to do an alternate version of a Shepherd. I have one that I've actually started messing around with just because we need one. There's other factions that have the same thing. They can just use an extra sculpt or a new version or something. So it's possible that could happen. There are days where the first Friday of every month, we work half the day, then we take half the day off. Privateer buys us lunch. We do whatever we want. So there's times like last time we did that. It's called First Friday. Last time we did that, I just messed around with some different model ideas. I don't want to reveal them because they may turn into models. So But just goofing around on like Facebook groups, talking to people, there was one, I think last year I did just a real quick hammer-headed shredder. It may have been 2 years ago, just goofing around, but I'm like, that'd be cool to make, or a character rake, or there's always something that would be fun to make. It's just a matter of finding time. The problem is that we don't have a lot of time because we have so much to do with all the I almost said Mark III, with all the new edition stuff. With all the new edition stuff, with the new faction, there's just so much to do. People ask, they're like, are you working on any resculpts? Not right now for me because there's too much new stuff. So I would have to stop working on new stuff to work on resculpts.
Who decides whether a model needs a resculpt?
Well, to a certain degree, the players. But there's a lot of us in the studio that are miniature gamers. We play our game, we play other games. We're miniature guys. So we know when a miniature needs resculpted. Trust me, we don't need somebody saying, that really sucked. We got it. So it's just a matter of fitting it in. There's always a lot of resculpts, especially War Machine's 12 or 13 years old now. There's a lot of models that looked really good 12 years ago that, as sculpting has gotten better, that they could use improvements. So those are things we'd like to visit, but it's just a matter of fitting it in. And if you already have that model, the odds of you buying that new resculpt, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Whereas if it was a brand new model and it was for your faction, odds are you do buy it. So it could also be a sales thing. It's just a matter of fitting it into the schedule, though.
Is there a gargantuan for the minions in plan?
Is there? I'm sorry. Say again.
A gargantuan for minions.
I have no idea. And if I did, I still wouldn't tell you. I hope someday there is, because what an opportunity to make a giant gator, right? Because sci-fi has done it and not done it well for years, making giant gators and giant sharks, and they don't look good. So maybe at some point we will get to, and we can make something that looks really cool.
A cross between a gator and a pig.
Fine. Yeah, a long-snouted pig with giant teeth and yeah, right. Well, if Sharknado can have 3 or 4 versions, you might be onto something. And we'll give you full credit, of course. No, we won't. Yes.
Do you prefer to do models for a faction you play?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to make it crappy. If it's for a faction I play, I'm going to try to make it the best I can. Yeah. Now, I say that, and I find that when I work on models for other factions, I'm not as emotionally involved. So I'll just make it look like the art, which usually art is good. Our art has gotten so good, in fact. But I'll just make it like I was talking about that Crix model. I made it look just like the art. It turned out great. I didn't like it because I don't play Crix very often, and I didn't. I wasn't personally invested in that model because it wasn't my faction. But then I'll start working on something for Legion or Ret, and I'm nitpicking it, or I don't like the way something looks, and it takes too long, and because I'm trying to make it just right, because I'm going to play it in a year. Questions?
And more extreme sculpts, and would you like to do more?
I don't know. I don't think there's any extreme sculpts planned. Again, it comes back to time. With the new edition, there's just been so much new stuff to do, and there's been models that have needed resculpts, like the Black 13th. Obviously needed
The new ones are extreme.
some bulking up. Yes, they're extreme compared to the last version. Right. We actually put these on 30 millimeter bases this time instead of like 15 mil bases. So as far as what I like to do in extreme, I don't know so much as I'd like to do an extreme sculpt as I would to see maybe a character war beast go epic. Maybe it becomes like a gargantuan or something. I think that would be cool. I mean, can you see Typhon on a 120 mil base? Maybe an extra head or something, or I mean, there's just a lot of options there. Our world has so much cool stuff in it that there's just a lot of things we could do that would be neat. Anybody else? Over here.
Sort of keeping it in the same vein as far as resculpts are concerned, what about Nis Hunters? The bane of everyone's existence.
Nis Hunters.
They are pretty fine.
Those are, that's the Weapon Master guys, right?
Yeah. Mercs.
Yeah, where everybody stabs themselves assembling them. Yeah. They're really good because they're so hard to put together.
That's your reward. Once you put them together, your reward is having a great unit.
They, yeah, right? I don't know if that's possible. Have you assembled them?
Well, I
No, I got
can
hit.
assemble pretty everything what I get in my hands.
Oh, okay. So if anybody needs NIS assembled, just bring them over here. And yes, NIS are a pain to assemble. So I know that they would be a good candidate for a resculpt, but I wouldn't wait to buy NIS if you really want them for the resculpts. That's a good way to go around this, right? Never mind, I'm not going to comment. I was reading their card recently, so I've got nothing. Yes.
Could you please try to make a little bit longer pins when you are making the parts?
Longer.
Yeah, because when you are making the parts, you have like small pieces which you are taking together.
The joints.
Yeah, the joints. Could you make them a little bit bigger? Like longer, for example?
No. I will recommend that for you. In all sincerity, some of the problem with working in digital the last couple of years is on your screen on a 22-inch monitor, it looks like that connection point is going to be sweet. You know, it looks like it's going to go together great. It's going to be a nice fit. There's plenty of contact space on it. And then we get it in and it's like 0.5 millimeters wide and nobody can handle it. So we have two guys that work in the studio that all they do is engineering now. So over the next year, as new releases come out, I think you're going to find that your models are going to go together a lot better. So we actually have addressed that. And hopefully it will be, as someone with hands my size, trust me, better connection points would be good for me too. So
For me it's no problem, but I always hear the objections like, I'm not doing this, do it for me.
Sure. No, I think we've moved in the right direction on that, and I think you're going to find that a lot of our models, probably models that are releasing right now even, are going to go together a lot better than maybe some previous models had. That doesn't mean that I'm going to not screw something up, because I will. There will be some models that just are not going to go together great, and that's probably my fault, but once it's together, it should look cool. So it'll be worth the effort. Okay?
Yep.
We'll try though. I really think you'll find they're going to go together a lot better, just because we have people that's what they do now. So it should be better.
As a sculptor, can you influence the material? Like, can you say this would be great in resin, this would be great in metal, or is it just the engineers?
I actually have nothing to do with that. That's a production design. They make those decisions. Sometimes I know ahead of time what it's going to be, and it may influence how I sculpt to a certain degree, but for the most part, I just try to sculpt and make it look good. And then if they decide on a material and we need to change something, then I can backtrack and clean it up a different way, or the engineers will cut it a different way. It's literally something I have nothing to do with. And I'm glad. That's.
So, of all the models you've done, which one do you want to resculpt, and how would you do it?
I want to resculpt Aurora. She was the first War Machine model that I ever sculpted. It was literally, I walked in a privateer on a Monday, and I was a couple thousand miles away from home, and I'd never worked for a company like that before. And they hand me artwork for level 7. They hand me some artwork, and they're like, "Have you ever heard of Convergence of Cirrus? And here's a new caster for it. You know, this beautiful illustration by Andrea with wings." And I'm like, "I've never heard of that, and oh my God, I'm gonna die, because I'm gonna screw this up, and they're gonna send me back to the Midwest, you know." And so nobody at the company worked in ZBrush at that time, and we had one other digital sculptor, and he just did jacks and robotic stuff. So there was nobody that did organics digitally, and I wasn't bad at it, but I was still new, and I had never had a model released anywhere. So Aurora was actually the first model that I ever had released to the public, and she came out at Lock and Load that year. Now, I opened up those old digital files about 6 months ago and looked at how I had sculpted her, and I can't believe they approved her, because she's not a bad model. She's really not a bad model, but being newer to the industry and to sculpting, each year I can see where I level, you know, and I'll tell my friends sometimes, I'm like, I leveled. You know, because you can just tell, you're like, all of a sudden you're going good, all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's pretty kick-ass. And then you go for another 8 months or a year and you're like, oh, I leveled again. And I think you'll see it. And so like the Whirlpool that I showed you earlier today, it's a pretty kick-ass model. And the Legion model I'm going to show tomorrow, it's a kick-ass model. You know, so some of the stuff that's coming out, you know, I'm like, I couldn't have done that a year ago, or I couldn't have done that 2 years ago. And there's no way I would have done it 3 years ago. But when I look at something like Aurora's face, you know, when I started Privateer, I'm like, I should be pretty good at sculpting females. I wasn't. It took almost 3 years where I could get a female face to look good. Female faces are hard to sculpt because you want them to look like they're going to kick ass, but they still have to look feminine. And a lot of sculpts you look at, especially at this scale, you look at it and you're like, what happened to her face? Because it doesn't, I don't even know if it's human, much less female, you know, or it looks too blocky, so it looks male. And it just takes some time to figure out how to make it right. So now I sculpt a lot of our females, just because I study hard.
Female anatomy.
Female anatomy, yes. My boss, yeah, well, not all of them. You have to have variety. My boss, Ed Burrell, walks by, and sometimes there might be a butt on the screen, and he's like, you know, you're the only one that can get away with that. It's reference. Now, there's been a few times where I've had guys up on my screen, underwear models, all ripped and buff, and so people walk by and I'm like, go ahead, say it. Just, you know, I'm just waiting for them to say something about the underwear model, you know, on my screen. But fair is fair. I mean, if you're going to do a good job on a sculpt, do a good job on all of your sculpts. So that's usually what I try to do. And sometimes it's females, and sometimes it's guys in their underwear. Fortunately, not too many of the guys in there. Usually I just do monsters and women. I'm saving the best for last. Come on.
Okay, so when you sculpt models from the same faction, for example, do you have a library of parts that you can use? Or do you usually sculpt the whole thing from scratch?
It depends. There might be a few pieces that you can grab from another model. I mean, if I'm doing a UA for a unit attachment for for an infantry unit, well, then there's going to be some interchangeable parts. Or if I'm doing 3 different poses for a unit, then some of the armor pieces can be reusable. But there's other things like Legion, for example. Their armor is any faction really. There's similarities, but it's just different enough. There's you can't just grab it and use it, you know, because the concept artist or the art director has changed it just enough where it's not the same. Like the new Retribution caster, she looks a lot like all the other stuff in Retribution, just not exactly. You know, just enough where you're like, you know, I have to resculpt that entire piece, don't I? But that's okay. It's kind of what my job is. If we could just grab the pieces and make a new model, you know, Frankenstein a model together, then they wouldn't need me as much as they do. So, more questions? Anybody else? Nobody? Please? All right.
Well, with the new casters here laid out on the table, I notice a bit of a scale disparity among the humans. Would you agree with that? The protector guy is really a big guy compared to the Kader guy. Way bigger than way bigger than that.
Demonstrate a smig.
There may be a better answer to that. We're all different.
scale, like policy or something?
Well, you try to keep things close. But when you have different artists from around the world working on projects, sometimes there's differences. I know for me, my models tend to lean more true scale. So there's a lot of times where they have to be adjusted a little bit to make them work right. For example, my face is a lot of times my female faces are real fine and soft. So I'll have to go back in and redefine those features, like a cheekbone, for example. If I make it soft how it actually is, it may not show up in a sculpt. So I'll redefine that and I'll enhance it, I'll over exaggerate it. And if you look at it on my monitor, on like a 22-inch monitor, you're like, what is wrong with that face? Well, sometimes you have to do that because then when it shrinks down, it looks right. So it's just a matter, sometimes it's just a matter of technique, sometimes what's going to show up and what's not going to show up. Other times it's just different sculptors working on different projects and are working on different models and have a different feel for what scale is. So it's just not an exact science. So overall, looking at those models, I feel like they're pretty good as far as scale goes. And as far as the Protector guy's just a big dude. I mean, if I put armor on, that's what I'm going to look like. Except for the weird head. I don't know. And the book, I wouldn't. Yeah. So everybody else is kind of in line. I feel like they're in line with very similar scale. Obviously, Bainwitch Agathea is much taller, and she's supposed to be creepy like that. So I think it's pretty good, actually. And to see all the new casters together painted, like we have at the studio, it's a good batch of casters. So I think I get your concerns, but I think we're okay.